when that person knows you care about them as a human being, they'll go to the moon and back for you. Friday night, there's a football game. It may be 98 degrees outside, but by golly, there's a football game that's going to occur this Friday night. And I want you to check out the enthusiasm in the stands. And then I want to ask you, what happened Monday on the factory floor or on the job site? Where did all that energy go? Because I saw full human beings at that football game. I saw human doings show up in the workplace. Close the gap between human beings and human doings. Get closer to Friday night football and further away from most Department of Motor Vehicles.
Where is the line between being effective and being liked?
Do we need people to be a friend with us? Do we need to be a friend to people? No, we need to be a human being to people. What most leaders don't realize is they need to understand what people hear is not what you say. What people hear is what they hear. And the only way for you to know what people hear is to ask them.
Listen, ask them. Yes. Oh,
ask them.
So close.
But here's what that looks like. So if I ask you to do something, then let's be real. And after I ask you to do it, and instead of asking, do you have any questions? Let's say, hey, you know what? I don't always express myself really well. My wife reminds me that all the time. Could you please tell me what you understood, what you understand the ask to be? And listen to the words they use. That's what they heard. It's not what you said. It's what they heard, which is more important than what you said. And that's your invitation to clarify and then to ask questions like, what kinds of challenges would you see in getting this done? And what kind of resources do you need to do a really good job here? How can I assist? And what does check-in look like? And you need to lay out your expectations really clearly. Like, I'd like you to check in once a week and tell me where you are, and do it by text, or do it by email, or do it by a note on the bulletin board, or leave a sticky on my door. And so you need to be really explicit, because what I do as a leader is I assume you knew what I meant. And I assumed you knew what kind of check-in I wanted. And I assumed you knew what great looked like. And so, again, I'm not a mind reader, but for about 9 out of 10 leaders that I meet, this is an issue, because we get really tired of having to follow up to discover things aren't done the way we wanted them done, or they're not done in a timely fashion, or they're not done at all. And how frustrating, because we assume stuff's happening and it's not. What a frustrating situation. Sound familiar?
And I'd venture to say a very common situation, one that I'm not a stranger to myself. And I love the way that we started this conversation, because I would venture to guess that this is something that my audience deals with on a daily basis. So I got to ask, Dave, what qualifies you to give this advice?
Yeah, well, beware anybody who says they're an expert. But what I can tell you is my passion and my purpose is to unlock potential in people, whether it's the leader or the team. And it doesn't matter if it's blue collar, white collar, gray collar, doesn't matter. If they're old, young, Z generation, boomer generation, I don't care. They're a human being and they have potential. They have things to contribute to the organization well beyond what their job description says. And that's my passion. And to follow up on that passion, I've talked to thousands of leaders, and I've learned from thousands of leaders things that work and don't work, common mistakes made, and ways that you can unlock potential in people. And so all I'd say is, look, I've got a lot of experiences to share. It's not the way I did it as a CEO. It's stuff I wish I knew as a CEO that I know works.
Yeah. Where were you as CEO?
So I've been a CEO of multiple technology companies, so internet companies based down in Silicon Valley. I've also sat on the board of service companies like Ameritrade, where I was on the board of directors for 7 years and saw phenomenal growth. I've also sat on nonprofit boards. I've been advisor to a whole bunch of firms as a consultant for the last 10 years. So I've seen what works and doesn't work.
Yeah. And what is it that you do now?
So now I work with individual leaders, teams of leaders in helping them unlock potential to get better results, to get better alignment, both through strategic planning and developing leadership skills. Work with a team of people that do that. We work across a variety of industries across the country and some internationally. And the gratification for us is seeing people and teams achieve things they didn't think they could achieve and getting all this noise and irritating stuff out of the way so they can do great things.
So you went from leading to helping leaders lead.
Yeah,
So you must be pretty passionate about leadership and about people and
absolutely.
development.
Absolutely. And again, I'm a learning machine. So, I wrote a book that's basically a book of here's what I learned. And one of the
Yeah. And what's that book?
examples
What's
about
that book
how
called?
people hear the book is called The Buy-in Advantage: Why Employees Don't Care and how great leaders inspire them to give their all. Because we're in a crisis
Oh
right now.
man.
We're in a people crisis right now. And it's true of every business. It's, Gallup research says we're at a 10-year low in people caring. It's pathetic. A net of 1 out of 3 people care. And I don't mean they aren't, I'm not measuring satisfaction. I'm not talking about are they happy at work. I'm not talking about do they like the lunch breaks or the policy or your benefits or the ping pong table. I'm talking about would they recommend your place to work to friends? Would they recommend it as a place to work? And when a net of 1/3 of people say, yeah, this is a good place to work, we've got a serious leadership challenge right now.
Yeah, so let's talk about that for a second because that is a startling statistic, right? And as leaders, I imagine maybe you've seen this quite a bit, right? But there's got to be a bias, right? That's not true in my company. That might be
Right.
true overall, but that can't be true in my company. But
Oh, absolutely.
statistically speaking, right?
It is.
Statistically speaking, Dave, you're talking about all companies. So help me understand what you've identified or what has been identified as maybe the root cause of something like this, or is that a bigger question than just those words?
Well, let's talk about statistics and let's talk about real world. The statistics, the
Great.
research from Gallup, which I believe to be true, says the biggest predictor of an engaged employee, of somebody who really cares, is an engaged supervisor. In other words, if their supervisor is bought in, they are bought in. And the sad statistic says only about half of supervisors are bought in. And I can tell you as a CEO that we walk around in the rarefied atmosphere of people who care the most. Like, we're interfacing with those people who either have economic incentive or authority or something else, so that they're really bought in. It's hard for us to see or imagine that other people don't feel the same way. But there are a bunch of markers that, if we pay attention, suggest wait a minute, maybe my company is like those other companies and we are an average company. There are markers, but you have to pay attention to them and you have to be curious about them and, look out. So
Yeah.
can I go through the markers?
Please.
Here's what you'd see. You'd see things like you pay what you feel is a competitive wage, and people who you think are really good or you want to be there leave. If they leave for 25 cents an hour, they're going to tell you they got a better job. And if you're like a lot of leaders, you're going to feel a sense of disappointment and frustration and how ungrateful they are. They don't know everything we've done for them, and there's not going to be another place like it. But if talent you want to keep are leaving, that's one of the warning signs. Because if people are bought in, it takes about a 30% pay raise for them to leave. If they're bought in. So if somebody, let's say you're paying minimum wage, however you define it. Let's say you're paying, I don't know, $18 an hour, and somebody leaves for $19 an hour, they aren't bought in. And here's a great lie. I'll come back to the common warning signs, but here's a great lie I learned from a colleague of mine, Devin. And Devin said, "You know what the greatest lie is?" I said, "What's the greatest lie?" When people tell you they left for a better job. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, they tell you that because it's the polite thing to say, because they don't want to trash what's really going on or tell you the truth, because that might hurt their chances at another job or hurt their reputation, and there's no benefit in doing it. The reason, so, and here's statistic to back it up. We work with a client that had turnover of, say, 400 people one year. This was a couple of years back. And they sent a questionnaire to the people's homes and said, you can only select one reason why you left the company. And there's a list of like 30 reasons. And what's interesting is you would think it might be pay, but pay was tied with poor communications from my boss. My boss didn't meet my expectations. So then they sent the questionnaire to the bosses of all those people and said, tell me the one reason those people left. Virtually all the bosses said pay. In other words, the boss had no understanding of the impact they were having, nor were they necessarily curious about the impact they were having. So we walk around as bosses living in the lie that people leave for money, when in fact, that's not always the reason people leave, and most of the time it's not why they leave. Unless they're getting a 30% raise, in which case I say, God bless you, go get the 30% raise. I'd take that. But that's not really what's happening. So if talent is leaving your company, pay attention and dig deep to understand why, with no need for justification or defensiveness or anything else. So key talent leaving, one warning sign. Another warning sign, meetings start late. Meetings run over. Meetings are canceled. Meetings are generally, and this is obviously not on the factory floor, but in the executive offices, meetings are generally viewed as the biggest waste of time, and there's no reason for that. And so we have a number of techniques that we can talk about that make meetings worth the time, but basically meetings are a waste of time. But if they start late, run over, or people zone out, that's a warning sign. Another one, objectives are missed. We set up these plans and we didn't hit the plans. We didn't hit the numbers. Key objectives indicate a buy-in problem. Another symptom you'd see, people do exactly what they're asked to do. And you'd think, well, what's the matter with that? If we have the full human being, what we'd expect to see is individual initiative. How many times did people come to you last week and say, you know what, I've got an idea for how we could do less of this, more of that, better serve the customers, cut costs? It can be really simple things. It can be, you know what, if we reordered our assembly line, we could cut steps out of this process. And the people doing the work are the people that have the best ideas. And if you just say, hey, you got any ideas on how we can make things better? You're not going to hear anything, because people know whether or not you're willing to listen and care. And if they know you're willing to listen and curious and humble, they'll come to you and say, here's a better way we can do stuff, dude. And they'll know that you'll consider it and share with them your response about why it could work, or you'd ask questions or clarify, as opposed to judging it and shooting it down. So people doing exactly what they're asked and no more, another warning sign. And just a couple more. People unclear about their role. I don't mean their job description. I mean they're unclear how they're making an impact in the organization. And that happens far too often. People being confused about who's responsible for what, like who do I go to for fill in the blank. In a business of 3 people, it's pretty obvious. In a business of 20, it gets a little more confusing. And the final warning sign, customers, key customers, the customers we want because they're profitable or they have potential, are leaving us or they're cutting back. Those are all warning signs of a buy-in problem.
It's a lot of warning signs, Dave. And honestly, some of them I've seen before, some of them I've seen firsthand, some of them I've heard about. Some are the reasons why people have come to my company, and transparently, I'm sure some of those over the years have been reasons why they've left my company. So, before we move on this topic, I've got some specific questions here. So, you mentioned that if they're bought in, it takes about a 30% pay raise for them to leave, right?
Yes.
And so you talk about lies. You talk about lies we tell ourselves as leaders. And I think that maybe somewhere in there, one of those lies is that if the culture is good, if I'm the perfect boss, if I don't have any one of these red flags, then even 30% shouldn't be enough for people to leave because they just won't leave. So let's unpack that a little bit. And, maybe there's not much there. Maybe it's just surface level face value stuff. 30% is a big raise, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But like where is that reality for leaders that they have to expect, balance that culture with that pay?
Right. So, when I would lose a talented person that I really wanted to keep, and I learned that they got a job that was 30% pay or more, the question is, how did I react? Because that's a message to the rest of the organization. And frankly, I would celebrate them and I would shout from the rooftops that they got a big promotion because it is good for everybody to have opportunities. And I'm sorry that they left us, but I'm happy for them. And if I'm genuinely happy, it sends a really strong cultural message. We worked with a company that's involved in corporate aviation. So they hire jet jockeys, they hire pilots to fly CEOs around. And I asked them about turnover, and they said, "Oh, yeah, we have some turnover." And I said, "Well, tell me about the turnover." And they said, "Well, we lose pilots to Southwest and Delta. And, that's just terrible when they leave." I said, "Why is it terrible?" They said, "Well, because then we have to go fill that vacancy." And I said, "Is going to Southwest and Delta what those pilots were looking for?" And they said, "Yeah, most of them just use us as a stepping stone." And I said, "All right. And are those good quality pilots who left?" "Yes, they are." I said, "Okay, well, let's flip this scenario around. The next time you do a recruiting session down in Fort Worth or over in Kansas City, I want you to ask people, what is your career intention? And if they say, I want to work for the majors, then use that to your advantage and say, you know what? I understand that, but we'd like you to come to work for us for at least 3 years because if you can meet our standards, you're going to be really attractive to the majors. And so we'll help you get there. But what we ask for is you give us 3 solid years of performance. And when they shifted that, they were able to hire more people. And the culture shifted. People didn't have to hide the fact they got hired by Southwest or Delta. The company applauded them getting that promotion.
So from and I'm going to relate this back to the industry that I'm in, the blue collar skilled trade. So instead of pilots, let's replace that with field service technicians,
Sure.
HVAC technicians,
Yep.
plumbers,
Yep.
electricians, whatever. So the common narrative is that kind of what you started off by saying in this episode was, when people would leave, there would be a disgruntled attitude towards them, a sense of judgment,
Right.
towards them. And I don't remember the word that you used here, but you know what, you understand what I'm saying. So
Yeah.
how can people look at this and say, from an industry perspective, and say, okay, well, I'm going to create a culture that is going to be viewed as a stepping stone and celebrate that, but it's going to be good for my business. How would we justify that being good for our business?
Yeah. So it's good for our business, frankly, because it helps us attract quality people. So let's make a simple assumption about the person who is the HVAC expert or the carpenter. The question I'd ask is, do they take pride in their work? Is it about the money? Absolutely, positively. They need to put food on the table. Got that? That's table stakes. But the question is, are they really good at what they do? Do they take pride in their work? And do they want to learn? If those conditions are true, those are the people I want. And then I'm going to create a culture of celebrating excellence. I'm going to call out to the entire team our entire carpenter team exactly how this job was done, what the client said, and celebrate the carpenter who did it. I'm going to create an environment where people feel really good about what they're doing and can take pride in their work. Because I've recruited people where pride in their work is important. It's not just check off the box and complete the project. It's do it in a way where we can be proud and we can look, 3 years later and look back and go, that's our work. We really rocked it there. The client was delighted. We were able to surprise and delight the client or the general or whoever it is we're working for. And those are the people we want. But if it's just, did you get the job done? You wasted some material. If that's the feedback people get, then they're going to know, you know what? Pride doesn't matter. Quality doesn't matter. They just want to get the job done and they're cheap. And if that's what people believe about your company, you're going to have turnover issues and you're going to get quality just as you deserve.
I really love that, and thank you for being so transparent and authentic about this. I can tell by the way that you're talking that not only are you passionate about this topic, but you're speaking from a place of truth too, which I
Yeah.
think is what we appreciate on this show. So I have to ask, creating a culture celebrating excellence, right?
Yeah.
This is something very rewarding for employees, especially our team members, especially the A players. And we always hear this narrative in business, right? A players, B players, C players, right? And the A players will leave based on how you treat the C players, and vice versa. So, are you also
Absolutely.
creating are you also creating a culture where if the same A players are constantly applauded, that you are naturally weeding out the people that might not fit the culture?
Well, I think we've confused two different concepts here, and let me explain.
Great.
First of all, if A players are those people that are extraordinary as opposed to above average, um, everybody deserves recognition and appreciation first as a human being, and then as a human doing. And we'll talk about that in a second. But let me also say if a person does not fit our culture, they shouldn't be there. And so if a person doesn't map against our values and our purpose, that was a hiring mistake. That was our mistake, not their mistake. They're not bad. We're bad. We blew it. We blew it in the hiring stage. But one of the things I can tell you is this buy-in crisis that exists right now in the American workplace and in other countries too, not unique to the US, even worse in the UK and other places, but just on the US, three things have happened. One is people went through the pandemic and couldn't go to the job site and had a chance to reflect on what's really important. And they have much higher expectations from the employer than they ever had before. And they're willing to sacrifice less if the work really doesn't matter. I don't mean the pay, I mean the work. So, changing expectations as a result of COVID is number one. Number two, we have a new generation coming on strong where a sense of purpose greater than money is really important. A sense of purpose. And if your business is not clear on what your compelling purpose is, why it's worth doing the work, how our company is different, how we're making the world different, if we're not clear on that, we don't communicate it and reinforce it, we're going to lose out. The third, equally important, is a sense of certainty. People are looking for a sense of certainty. Now, they know you can't guarantee their job forever, nor do they expect that. But as a leader, you need to tackle the uncertainty head on and go, look, I'm not sure what's going to happen with interest rates or how that's going to affect our workflow. I don't know that. But what I do know is here's what's important to us, and reinforce your compelling purpose, your values, and what your objectives are for that year. We're going to increase quality as measured by XYZ, or we're going to decrease waste this year, or we're going to take accidents down to zero because families matter and your family is counting on you. Whatever it is, it's important to you this year. Reinforce it because that we can be certain about. So let me go
I
back to
see.
human beings versus human doings for a second.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times, with best of intentions, A leader will say, "How you doing?" Person says, "Fine" or "Good." And then the leader plows on and says, "Okay, look, here's what I need you to do. I need you to go to this site and I need you to blah, 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 blah." And what they've just said is, "I don't really give a crap about you. I was just being polite and you were just being polite back." And that says what's important to you about that person is what they're doing, not who they are. And you're not going to tap into full potential if the person doesn't feel that they are seen as a human being with huge potential. And so let's just change that scenario for a second. How about if you said, "How you doing?" and they say, "Fine," and you said, "I'm curious to know what makes it fine. What's going on? I'm really curious." Or what if you asked instead, "What's one personal and one professional celebration you're experiencing right now?" And ask them to share a celebration. And you, leader, you ready to share a celebration as well. And celebration, one personal, one professional. Don't miss the personal. What's one thing you're really looking forward to in life? What's one thing going on in your personal life that you'd like to share and let others know is really good? Or, you know, we all deal with challenges. What kind of challenges are you facing? And take the time to listen. When that person knows you care about them as a human being, they'll go to the moon and back for you. If you're just a human doing, then you're going to get the, "Sure, just tell me what you want me to do. I'll just do it." And they won't put their heart and soul into it. So, look, they're in Phoenix, Josh. Friday night, there's a football game. It may be 98 degrees outside, but by golly, there's a football game that's going to occur this Friday night. And I want you to check out the enthusiasm in the stands. I want you to see how much energy's there. And then I want to ask you what happened Monday on the factory floor or on the job site. Where did all that energy go? Where did that enthusiasm go? Because I saw full human beings at that football game, and I saw human doings show up in the workplace. So my challenge to every leader: close the gap between human beings and human doings. Get closer to Friday night football and further away from most Department of Motor Vehicles.
What this is really really good. I love this take. I actually just posted something on LinkedIn from the equal and opposite perspective of being that human being or human doing for yourself. So I really love this topic. I would ask, what challenges would some leaders face in exhibiting this type of behavior? Maybe it's new for them, maybe it's something they've never experienced either from a boss or a parent.
Yeah,
What challenges have you seen them butt up against and how do they overcome them?
you nailed it. They've never seen it before. They've never been treated that way. And if they're not treated that way, it's almost out of sight, out of mind for them to treat somebody else that way. Because if you have a board of directors, or if you have a CEO as a boss, or you have vice president of manufacturing as a boss, or vice president of whatever, you're likely to be asked, "Where are we on the numbers? How are we on production? Where are we on waste? Are we getting this done?" And being treated as a human doing. So you actually have to start to break the cycle yourself and treat people first as human beings. And what you'll find is your job gets a lot easier because people are willing to share more. They're willing to take initiative. They're willing to let you know what things could be better and how they could be better. They're willing to go the extra mile. And wouldn't that make your life easier as a boss? I think it would. But you need to slow down to speed up. And slowing down means take the time to recognize human beings at the beginning of every meeting. So, one of the best practices, even for a stand up meeting at a site, best practice, go around and say, "Hey, before we get started for the day, lot to do, but I want to check in. What's one thing you're celebrating personally? What's one thing professionally?" Or whatever. Just check in and let everybody go around for 30 seconds and see each other as human beings and recognize we're all on this journey. We all have highs and lows. We all have challenges and joys. We all have stuff that amuses us and stuff that really pisses us off. And that's the human condition. So let's celebrate as human beings.
I love that. what if somebody, and just going to play a role from my audience and devil's advocate here. What if somebody comes
Sure.
to you and says, Dave, that sounds great. Slowing down to speed up sounds like a lot of fun, but I really just need to speed up. I don't have time to have these conversations. I've got
Right.
X meeting and phone call, and I'm busy, busy,
Yeah.
busy. How do I balance that time?
Yeah. Well, apparently you have time to deal with turnover. Apparently you have time to follow up with people because they didn't do what you asked. Apparently you have time to chase people. So if you've got all that extra time, then I say, hey, you don't need to do any of this stuff. If you're tight on time and you want other people pulling in the same direction, I'd suggest you make the investment in human beings because your job will become a lot easier and things will get better done.
Absolutely incredible answer to that. Thank you. No,
Cool.
that is that's really good. Okay. All right, good. That from a cultural human beings, human versus human doings aspect, that makes a lot of sense. Let's go back to some of these other red flags that you had here. I'm just gonna pick one, and here let's talk about the people that do exactly what they're asked. I knew
Yeah.
what you meant by this the second that it came out of your mouth because I've seen it before, right? And it's not hard to recognize when somebody does just enough to not get fired. How do you know if that is a cultural misfit, say you hire the wrong person, or if it's a leadership problem, or are those two different things? Like,
Yeah. So I don't know which it is, but what I know is that leaders who inspire everyone to give their all, those leaders know how to ask something to be done in a way that's different than an average leader. And here's what the difference is. Average leaders say, "Hey, here's what I need you to do. I need you to do it, do this, and do it this way." And that's great. And that's from your experience as a leader. But you're not honoring a human being. You're not honoring that human being's experience or insights. You're just asking for a robotic response. And that's a person who will do it just to the bare minimum in your perception. Um, but here's a different way to do it. What if you went to someone and you said, hey, you know what? We're having a real issue with waste. And specifically, we've got a waste of lumber and it's running well above the average, and our competitors are wasting a lot less, and that causes us to have to bid higher prices, and we're not getting the work that we deserve because our waste is way up. So as I think about this, I may have some ideas, but here's what I know to be true. A great idea is something that we can, and then they share what we call their criteria list or the checklist in their mind. So the boss shares a checklist of what a great solution looks like. It's something that we can implement quickly, that's simple enough that everybody will understand. It's something we can repeat. It's something we can measure. And ask the person who is doing the work, could you take a day and give some thought to what we might do to reduce waste to become more competitive that would meet that criteria? I'm interested in your ideas. You are honoring a human being, you are honoring their experience, and they're going to come back with ideas you never thought of. Or maybe they come back with ideas you've thought of, but they think about them differently, and it can enhance your thinking. When somebody is involved in coming up with a solution, we call that done with, not done to. And people who are done with feel much more committed, they are much more bought in, and they're going to give you a much better result. And so, slow down to speed up means take the time to do with and let somebody else come up with solutions. And frankly, because you've got a huge blind spot, they might come up with better solutions than you have. And if they're actually doing the work, they probably will. And so, what an inexpensive, by the way, this costs nothing. This costs nothing. Oh, yes, you had to wait a day. I'm sorry. But what if you got a much better answer? What if somebody's bought in? What if you got better results? So, leaders who inspire people to give it their all share, here's the outcome we're looking for. Here's the checklist of what great looks like. I'm curious to know, what are your thoughts on how to accomplish that? And give them a time to think about it.
I like that a lot. So I'm hearing this word of leaders who inspire. And
Mhm.
I really like that because when you think about leadership, there's a lot around being, at least for, I guess, some people, they love the thought of being able to inspire a team to all row in the same direction toward the same goal. That's like the epitome of being an incredible leader, right? So one of the traps that I've felt is, the danger, and I'd love your take on this. Where is the line between being effective and being liked? Or how
Hmm.
should we look at that differently?
Yeah. So, do we need people to be a friend with us? Do we need to be a friend to people? No, we need to be a human being to people. Human being to people means we're willing to be vulnerable. We're okay saying, I don't know. We're okay saying, I might be wrong about this, or I might not be thinking about this correctly. That's showing up as a human being. You don't need to be liked. You don't need to be people's friends. You need to be respected. You need to be respected not because you're a tough guy or you're a rah rah woman. You need to be respected because people know you see them as human beings, you treat people the same, and you think about things and treat people fairly to the best of your ability. You're willing to be humble and you have expectations that are equal across the board of everybody. So you're not a
I like
jerk.
that. I like that. No, I like that a lot. Now, that does spark another question, though, about if there's a bar, if there's a line. You think about people like Michael Jordan and Steve
Uh-huh.
Jobs and
Yeah.
Elon Musk. Some people that others would regard as incredible leaders, but also call them jerks in the same exact sentence. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
Yeah.
where is that a competence over compassion thing? Like, help me understand how that's possible.
Yeah. So look, there are people who can be real jerks, and I'm not saying that they are, but assume that those people are jerks. There are people who can be real jerks and get stuff done. The question is, do they leave an organization that can sustain, or were they just on their own as a superstar or ego-driven person? What did they leave in their wake? What happens to the organization after they leave? And that's a mark of success and leadership in my book. Badgering people, we call PB&J, and bully or bribe, is maybe satisfying for short-term results. You go, see, I got them to do it, but has no sustainability, and you don't get the best out of people. You get the bare minimum out of people, and then you declare victory because you're an egomaniac.
Fair
Just
enough.
saying.
No, I love that. I love that take. Thank you. So I want to transition a little bit to your book. This was all incredible information, and I know it's going to bleed into the rest of the conversation as well. I am curious. I shared with you before we started. We hit the record button that I love to be able to read books before I bring the guests on. I didn't get a chance to read yours, so I want to ask you some questions about it. Buy-in advantage, right, is what it's called, and I'm wondering if and I'm judging by most of like the leadership business books that I've read. So please correct me if I'm wrong. Again, haven't read the book. Is there a framework or pillars or chapters or whatever that is there some sort of a framework that you follow in this book? And what is that and what's it for?
Yeah, there are three parts to the book. The first part is, look, how did we get here? Why is there a buy-in crisis? It's not the leader's fault. It's not because people wake up and say, oh, I want to be an ineffective leader today. It's a real crisis that's occurring, and it's not just about you. It's about all of us. And the book is about, look, we can make other choices as leaders, but we have to perhaps have some increased awareness or shift some belief. Part two is what great leaders do in everyday situations to inspire people to give it their all. And part three is how to keep it alive. So it's built in that framework. But there are a couple of key ideas, some of which we've touched on, like human beings get more done than human doings, is a theme that runs through the book. Another theme is that all of us are smarter than any of us, meaning you own the fact as a leader that you have a blind spot. You're 6 o'clock, as we pilots say. You can't see behind you, and everybody has a blind spot, but your blind spot and my blind spot are different. So collectively, we'll know more than any one of us would know alone. And so this says, as opposed to the leader having answers. I remember going into a group of about 100 executives who had at least 20 years experience. And when we said, all of us are smarter than any of us, I saw about 25% of the eyes roll, because that when I talked to them later, I found out, look, my job is to give people answers. They come to me, knock on the door, and they ask a question, and I give them answers. And that gives people a dopamine rush. That makes people high because you're helping people. It's well intended, and it's absolutely the wrong thing to do if you want to grow the organization and grow people and have human beings, not human doings. But it feels really good because your answer is your answer. Your answer is governed by your blind spot. But if you have a different technique on how to answer the question of what do you want me to do, and you ask questions instead of answers, which is one of the chapters in the book, you'll get a lot better results. Another framework is collective.
Can I stop you right there real quick? Can I ask you a
Absolutely.
quick question?
Yeah.
What makes a good question?
Yeah. So I'm really curious to know, you brought this problem forward, and I appreciate you coming in. Question for you. What do you think a great solution is? And whatever they say, zip your judgment, because judgment and curiosity cannot coexist. That's another principle of the book. You cannot say, well, that'll never work, or that's a great idea. Zip it. Ask a question. What lets you know that that solution is a good solution? Or what else did you consider? And be curious, and you're going to learn about how that person thinks, how they see the world, what skills they have, what they don't have. And by your questions, like, well, if you also considered this, how might that change your answer? And whatever answer they come up with is the answer that they're going to implement much better than anything you could ever tell them. So if you just want robots running around doing your bidding and your weaknesses, just tell them what to do. If you want people to be wholly bought in and be closer to Friday Night Lights, ask them what they do and what else they considered and how do they know that was the right answer. You'll learn a ton, and you'll know where you can add your experience. And your experience shows up in the questions you ask.
Interesting. What if their answer is really terrible?
Yeah, if their answer is really terrible, that's an important message for you to understand, because the decisions they don't come to you with will also be terrible. And they're going to screw up all over the place, and you're not going to know about it. So what you need to do is just say, hey, I appreciate you thinking about it. Tell me how you got there. That's really interesting. Because if you just say, well, that doesn't make any sense, here's what you need to do, you've just shut down and created a human doing, and you're going to get crap.
So resist the impulse to
Yeah.
interject that unsolicited advice that we as leaders and CEOs are so good at. Just
Right.
resist that as much as possible and lean into the questions.
Right. It's like that when the doctor hits you on the knee with a hammer and your leg shoots out, zip that Pavlovian response to say, here's what you ought to do. Here's what you ought to do. Here's what you ought to do.
Great. I appreciate you answering that. All right. You were talking about the third thing in the book.
Yeah. So collective genius. This is all of us are smarter than any of us. And I talked about that a little bit before in terms of laying out what your desired outcome is. Like, we want to decrease waste, and why that's important, and what your checklist is for what great looks like, and then solicit ideas from everybody without any judgment, without going, oh, that's a good idea, or that'll never work, or whatever. List them all out, and then ask your team to select which is the best idea. Because if you've laid it out well, identified the problem, and if you've laid out the criteria correctly, they're going to select the best idea. And then it's theirs. It's not yours. They own it. Crazy but true. And let me give you an example of why I believe in collective genius. So there's a story from the early 1900s at a county fair in England, where a statistician lived in the town, and He asked everybody who came to the county fair to guess the weight of the ox. There's an ox hanging by a rope. And everybody comes in and tells them what the guess is. Nobody guessed the weight right. But being a statistician, he couldn't help himself. And Sir Galton averaged out the answers. And the average answer was within 2 pounds of a 1,500-pound ox without any discussion. So fast
Huh.
forward, the U.S. Navy lost a submarine. The U.S. Navy lost a submarine in the 1960s in the North Atlantic. They had such a wide search area, it would take them months to find their submarine. But because it contained secrets, they needed to get it right away. So they reached out to 100 experts around the world who were experts in meteorology, experts in oceanography, experts in submarines, and all this stuff. And they said, "Where's our sub?" They took the answers and basically used advanced computer techniques to analyze the answers. Where they identified the sub was within 200 yards on the bottom of the ocean, 1,500 miles west of the Azores. Fast forward, presidential election. I was with a group of global CEOs on a Zoom call. It was 6 weeks before the election. More than half, or about a half, were outside the US. And I said, I'm curious to know who's going to win the election and by how much. I didn't ask for discussion. I didn't ask anybody to tell me why they thought what they thought. I just said, just drop your answer into the chat box. And I did that. And I forgot all about it. Election comes and goes. February, I'm about to have another quarterly call with this group. And I said, ooh, I better go look and see what they said. I averaged out all their responses, and their responses were within 0.4% of the results of the election. We did not have discussion. We did not have debate. There is no discussion or debate necessary of different ideas. That's just egos jabbering. Collective genius is, let's just look at the 20 ideas and everybody gets 4 votes and tell us which ideas you think are best. You can put 1 vote on each of 4. You can put all 4 votes on one, depending on how strong you feel. So I want to tap into your expertise as a human being to tell me what your opinion is without debating or saying, well, my opinion is better because.
Hmm.
So crazy, but true. Collective genius. It is amazing as a technique. And that's in the book.
That is those all of those stories are incredible, and I think that's awesome and speaks volumes to this collective genius, mindset and theory. I do have a question about leveraging this in our businesses, collective businesses, right? So, presumably, you have different experts in your businesses on different topics. So when you're seeking collective genius, do you seek the collective genius of everybody, or do you only go to those that know the material the best?
That is a great question. And let me use that as a launching pad to say, do you have a high trust environment? Do you have an environment where people are okay expressing opinions even when they know that it's not going to be popular and it won't be judged? If you have a high trust environment, you'll know it because people will bring issues to your team meeting where they are not looking to be pounced on and solved. They're looking to get other people's expertise, and it's in their area and they can solve it themselves. So, high trust environment, I'm okay bringing an issue here because I'm not going to be judged. You're not going to tell me how to do it. You're going to give me your experience, and then I can make my own decision. So, that's a high trust environment. Now, when we have a technical issue and we only have one technical expert in the room, that technical expert gets to take the lead in defining the problem and identifying the criteria, identifying the checklist. And if they've done that well, everybody's experience comes to count. Now, if you're asking a technical question about an O ring on a rocket, for example, and it's truly a rocket scientist question, you've got a room full of accountants, I probably wouldn't use this technique. But those people wouldn't be in the same meeting anyway. So I'm going to say people in the meeting have experience to bring to bear, and the fact that they're in the meeting says they've got something to contribute. So if you set it up right and be really specific about the issue and the problem and the question, and you have a checklist of what great looks like, people can give you their opinions, their outputs, without speaking a word.
Wow. No, very, very good. Thank you for that. I want to shift gears a little bit to a little more personal, how we can use this inside and outside of work. Before I do, I've got another question for you in transition to that, and it's a question I love to ask. It's, what's a truth, Dave, that took you years to fully accept, but once you did, it completely changed the way that you lived and led?
It's a truth that I had the answer and there was a single answer, because I was taught all through grade school the teacher had the answer and there is an answer. And what I came to realize is there's not an answer, there are many answers, and all are correct and all are good answers. In all but a very few cases, there are many good answers. And that's where this whole idea of the checklist came in, because I realized every answer is good, but there's only a better answer as it relates to whatever fit you've set up, right? So there's an answer that better fits the criteria you've set up, but there are many answers. It's you've heard of the classic car crash where you ask five people what happened. You get five different stories about what's happened. Who's telling the truth? The truth is everybody's telling the truth. And here's a crazy example we use with leadership teams. And I'm going to digress for a second, but we ask them, what's a stop sign? What if a camera were looking at a stop sign, what would a camera see? Let me ask you that question, Josh. What would a camera see looking at a stop sign?
I would see a red octagon with stop in the center.
Okay. We'd agree it's red. We'd agree it's an octagon. And then we'd say, well, wait a minute. Does a camera see letters? Does a camera see a word? And we'd argue, no, a camera really doesn't. What those are those are just shapes. And what we know is we have made up a story that says a certain shape is a letter, certain letters together are a word has a certain meaning. That's all stuff we make up because we've been taught that. And so it's not right or wrong, but a camera just sees this shape, red, with symbols, right? And so what I have to do is continually remind myself to get good at separating out the meaning I make of a situation versus what the situation is. And the situation is what the camera sees. And this is, for example, in today's political environment. It's sometimes like watching fifth graders because everybody's wrapped up in the meaning. Oh, no, it's a stop sign. No, it's not a stop sign. It's a blah, 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 blah. Look, the camera sees it's an octagonal. It's a octagonal shape. It's red. It's got some symbols. And then people who are great leaders will say, and you know what, Josh, the meaning I make of that, the story I make up about that is, and then fill in the blank. So they're not presenting what they see as the truth. They're presenting it as their truth and not to the exclusion of other truths. And that's a really humbling lesson that I came to realize, oh, it's just my truth. It's true for me. It's real to me, but it doesn't make it true. It makes it real to me. How's that?
That's fantastic. I have goosebumps here. You can't see it. Camera's not that good, but that's I really love that. I wrote down, it's not the truth, it's their truth. And I think that's something that we can all take away, because the power that resides in just the distinction between the objective and the subjective, I think is wildly disarming, right? Whether at work or anywhere else in life, like that's something you can carry with you no matter where you go.
Yeah, this is about life. It's not about work. But I'll tell you, I got a call from a really great CEO who said, "Look, I've got two of my executives are fighting, and they don't trust each other. You need to make them trust each other." And I said, "Look, I can't make anybody do anything, but I'm really curious, so I'll go observe." I go observe, and the one executive says the other basically, one executive says, "You're wasting money. You're wasting company money. And your decisions about this, this, and this are stupid." And the other one says, "You don't know crap about what I do in my area. You couldn't manage your way out of a paper bag." And I'm watching this going on, going, well, this is really interesting. We have meaning making out the wazoo. If their meaning making was printing money, I'd be a rich man. I'd just haul it away in wheelbarrows. And so when I explain to them, look, the difference between what the camera sees and the meaning you make of it is where truth and power lie. And if you can just own, hey, look, here's the truth. The truth is that I saw that we spent $21 million on this. That's what the camera sees. Now, the meaning I make of that is we probably could have spent 18 million. And the reason I think 3 million is wasted is because of A, B, and C, but that's just my story. You totally disarm that it's right and you're wrong. Because when you say I'm right, you're saying somebody else is wrong. And then you get into I'm not wrong, you don't understand it. And then we get into fights. That's just a total way. It's just ego ping pong. It's boring for everybody else to watch. It's destructive.
So how do you as a third party go into on a situation like that and disarm it and resolve that conflict?
So I went to each of them and we talked through the difference between what the camera sees and the meaning they make. We gave them skills to use language like the story I tell myself is, or the meaning I make of it is, which totally disarms the conversation. And we gave them the ability and the grace to listen to the other person's story and recognize it and validate it with equal credibility to their own. Here's what validation is. Validation does not mean you have to agree with somebody. Validation sounds like, hey, if I had your experience and saw things as you did, I could imagine I'd believe the exact same thing. You have to validate the other person's viewpoint because they have a right to that viewpoint as a human being. You don't have to agree with it. You have to validate it if you want yours validated. If you just want to say, they don't know anything, they're just a jerk, that's great because you're the jerk.
So is validating their viewpoint the same thing as validating their experience, their skills, and ultimately seeking respect? Like, is that where that's headed?
It's valid. It's you recognizing you're not the be all end all of truth, and you validate. You have look. I respect you have the right to your opinion, and I believe that your opinion is authentically held. I believe you're sincere in your opinion, and I've got that. I'm really curious to learn more about it. Or would you be open to other ideas as well? Because I've made a different meaning of the same thing. I saw the car crash differently.
So is this your version of? I say your version, but like, is this another way of saying seek first to understand and then be understood? You know, because I've heard that before, but I haven't heard this take. I actually like this better. It helps me visualize, that statement a little bit more. I think the first one was Stephen Covey, but I believe that like they're, again, kind of to your point, right? Everybody has their own lens, and is that similar? Am I looking at that correctly?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
Look, we're wired as human beings. If we feel heard, we're willing to listen. If we don't feel heard, we'll yell louder or shut down. You choose.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So then, just a minute ago, you said this isn't work. This is life. And so, I've got to ask: is there anything different or any advice that you've given today that can't or shouldn't be used outside the workplace as that can be used inside the workplace? Or is it all one and the same, Dave?
It's all one and the same. I was on a panel in Vancouver of CEOs, and the discussion was about work-life balance and how you show up at work and how you show up in life. And it's like, you know what? Honestly, there isn't a difference. You are you. Josh shows up, whether he's coaching the soccer team or whether he's running his business or whether he's at church. Josh is Josh. He has his fears, his beliefs. He has his passions. Um, you know, you are you. And so this is all about life. It applies to raising kids. It applies to dealing with aging parents. It applies to neighbors. It applies to church. It applies to the football team. It applies to everything.
Mm.
It's life.
So then why do we act so different in all of these different examples you just gave at church with family, at work with friends? Why do we act so different as a whole?
If we do act different, and that's a story that you can check in on and ask somebody who loves you, do I act differently in these places? If you do act different, it's because you've made up a story about what the right way to act is.
Mm.
Because I believe if you're a sane human being, your actions always line up with your beliefs. And so if you believe you need to be a different person in church, I'm really curious to know, is the person you really are not okay in church? It doesn't mean you don't respect rules, like I won't scream out at the top of my lungs like I do at a football game in church in the middle of a sermon. I got that. But you're you, and you carry all your joys and wounds and all that stuff with you all the time. And we dress them up. We'll dress up and, put on a nice jacket at church and, be in shorts and flip flops at the beach. So you might show up differently, but basically, we're us.
How true is it that if you're not being you in these places, that people will notice?
If people are paying attention 100% of the time, they'll notice. And I'm going to suggest to you, you will feel under stress. You will feel uncomfortable because you'll know you're not you. And people can smell inauthenticity from a mile away. So as a leader, really important that you're real. And if you think you truly have all the answers, then you're just telling me I'm not necessary. If you're humble and say, look, I might not be right, my experience suggests that we might ask these questions. That's showing up as real and humble. It doesn't mean you're going to be rolled over. It means you recognize, hey, I have my truth. I have my experience. I don't have yours, and I'm curious to learn more.
Yeah.
That's a key theme of the buy-in advantage. And your business and your life has an advantage when you can put these practices into play. That's what the advantage is. You'll surround yourself with
Mm.
better people and you'll get better results and you'll be more pleased.
Dave, what's the most important thing that we haven't talked about today?
I would say there's a technique that's really simple that we call instant analysis from the book. And that's asking this question at the end of every meeting and on a quarterly basis with your team. Ask them ahead of time to consider their answers to this simple instant analysis question. And that's what's working, what's not working. Pretend you're an outside advisor to the business or our department. Tell me, what do you think is working? What's not working? And to be humble enough to take that feedback without any judgment and then allow the team to prioritize of the things not working. If we address this one thing, what would make the biggest difference? So tap into collective genius to address what's not working. But if you don't ask that question at the end of a meeting, like, hey, listen, as you think about this meeting, tell me what worked, what didn't work. You'll never know what people's experience is, and you're committed to repeating the same mistakes that cause people to say our meetings are a waste of time.
Which we never want to hear because we all know and do the math minute by minute in the meeting, and we know how valuable they actually are to us as leaders, CEOs, business owners, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Most are a waste of time, but not because we want them to be a waste of time. We just don't know a different way. There's a whole chapter on
Yeah.
effective meetings in the book, by the way. And it's
Mm.
simple stuff like at the beginning of a meeting, whether it's a one on one meeting or a team meeting, ask expectations. Ask the question, what would make this meeting a great use of your time? And listen to what's on people's minds.
Yeah, I really love that. So moving to the end here, we'll move to wrap it up. I'm curious. It's a question I love to ask. Right? What's What's the question, not a question, but the question that you wish people would ask you more? And then how would you answer that?
That is a great question. Um, and I would say, what do you celebrate about
Hmm.
the things that you've done in your career? Is it the fact that you've grown companies over 100% or sold companies for a lot of money or all? You know what? The greatest satisfaction is seeing people achieve what they didn't think they could achieve. It's the letter I get 15 years later from an executive that I've totally lost track of, who said, we worked together. And I know exactly who the person is. He said, we worked together, and I want you to know I've applied all the lessons that we've talked about as best I could, and I've made a difference in people's lives. And that's ultimately where my satisfaction comes from. It's the joy in celebrating with other people what they're able to do with what we did together.
That's a great answer to that question about the question. Thank you so much for that, Dave. Dave, if people want to learn more about you, the book, what you do, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I would say if you're curious about buy in, start with your self assessment. Take the buy in advantage assessment quiz, which takes about 90 seconds to do, and it's free and it's online. If you go to buyinbook.com, BUYIN book.com, and take the free 90-second assessment and see how you rate the buy in of your organization. It'll give you some clues. And then for advanced credit, ask your team to take the team assessment and then compare notes and learn about your 6 o'clock and what's going on for other people. If you want to find me, there's a contact information on buyinbook.com. You can also go on LinkedIn to find me. If you want to learn more about our team, Garrison Growth, Garrison, GROWTH, garrisongrowth.com is the place to go. We're always curious to learn for what works for other people, what challenges you run into, what it is you're celebrating. That's what we thrive on. You can write engage, engage at Garrison Growth.
Awesome. Well, Dave, I know you're a busy guy, and I just can't thank you enough for spending your time with me today, with my audience today. I know that they are going to get as much value from you in this episode as I did, and I've got like 3 or 4 pages of notes here. So thank you for that, for pouring into all of us, man, and for what you do on a daily basis.
Josh, thank you. Thank you for having me. Pick up the book, at least skim it or pick a chapter and read it, and let me know what you think and give me your experience, because that's how I learn. So thank you.
I will. Well, thanks a lot, Dave, and until next time.